The snow clung to the windows of Union Station in Chicago like a warning. Wind howled between the steel and concrete, and people walked briskly, hunched in coats and scarves, barely meeting each other's eyes. Inside the terminal, Jacob Mitchell sat alone on a cold bench, his suitcase by his feet, his eyes lost in a fixed, unblinking stare. The train to Denver was boarding in 20 minutes, and he didn't even feel the weight of that decision anymore. Everything in his life had collapsed. 3 months ago, he was shaking hands with investors, giving interviews, grinning like he had conquered the world. Now? His startup had crumbled under the pressure of debts and betrayal. His apartment was gone. His friends had disappeared like leaves in the wind. Denver wasn't a new beginning. It was supposed to be the end. The flickering fluorescent lights above gave everything a dull gray cast. A child cried nearby. A woman shouted into her phone. None of it registered. Jacob wasn't there to observe life, he was there to escape it. He stood when the intercom announced final boarding and moved toward the platform with the slow, deliberate steps of someone sleepwalking through his own fate. The train was long, metallic, humming with mechanical life. He stepped aboard, found his seat, and collapsed into it. The warmth inside didn't reach his heart. He rubbed his hands together, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in his chest. The whistle blew. The train jerked forward. Chicago faded behind him. It was nearly an hour into the ride when the man sat next to him. He wore a worn-out blue jacket with a railway patch stitched to the arm. His boots were muddy, his hands rough, but his face, there was something strange about it. Not in appearance, he looked like any other worker who spent his days lifting and fixing and checking, but in expression, his eyes were still, calm. And when he looked at Jacob, it felt like he wasn't just seeing him, he was reading something deeper. "Long trip ahead?" the man asked, his voice low, steady. Jacob barely turned his head. "Yeah." "Denver?" He nodded. The man smiled faintly. "Good place." Cold this time of year, but still good. Silence returned, but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that somehow demanded attention. "You look tired," the man said after a while. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Thanks." Not just tired in the face, tired in the soul. That made Jacob pause. He blinked and looked at the man fully for the first time. "What are you, a psychologist?" The man chuckled. "Not at all. Just someone who's worked long enough to know what pain looks like." Jacob leaned back, arms crossed. "Well, congratulations, you nailed it." The man didn't respond. Instead, he looked out the window at the falling snow, his breath steady. "You ever feel like everything you built was just sand?" Jacob asked suddenly, not sure why he spoke. The man turned to him, eyes calm. "Yeah. And I've also learned that sometimes what feels like the end is just the part where you're forced to look up." Jacob didn't reply. He didn't even understand why that sentence felt like it reached beneath the surface. The rhythm of the train lulled him into a strange quiet, a space between thought and numbness. He wasn't sure if he wanted to talk more, but something about the presence of this stranger kept his hands from shaking. And then, without warning, the man extended his hand. "Name's Eli." Jacob hesitated before shaking it. "Jacob." Eli nodded once. "Nice to meet you, Jacob. Before we dive deeper into this mysterious journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one." Outside, the white plains of Illinois passed in a blur. Inside, something was beginning to shift, barely noticeable but real. Jacob didn't know it yet, but this wasn't going to be a regular ride. It would be a reckoning. The train continued its steady rhythm westward, slicing through pale fields and half-frozen lakes. Jacob stared at the blurred scenery, his mind adrift. Eli, the man beside him, hadn't said another word since their brief exchange, and yet his presence was unshakable, like a song you didn't know the lyrics to but couldn't stop hearing in your head. The silence between them wasn't oppressive. It was heavy, but almost warm. Eli sat relaxed, hands resting on his knees, eyes occasionally scanning the car. Every so often he would glance at Jacob, not with judgment, but curiosity, like someone watching a fire and wondering what started it. "You from Chicago?" Eli asked, breaking the stillness. Born in Milwaukee, moved to Chicago after college, Jacob replied, arms crossed. What took you there? A job, then a business, then... He stopped himself. Then? Eli tilted his head. Jacob sighed. Doesn't matter now. It's all gone. Eli nodded slowly, as if he already knew. Sometimes losing something forces us to see what we still carry. Jacob gave him a sideways look. That's supposed to be comforting? It's not meant to be. Just true. He turned his gaze back to the window, but a flicker of something stirred inside him, irritation maybe, or the faintest crack in his carefully constructed wall. Eli had that effect, and Jacob couldn't explain why it bothered him so much. So, what do you do? Jacob asked, deflecting. Work maintenance. Keep the train running, fix things when they break. Grease, bolts, screws. The unglamorous parts. You enjoy that? Eli's face relaxed into a soft smile. I like being part of something that carries people. Even when they don't realize it, something's moving them forward. Jacob almost laughed. That's poetic for someone who handles bolts. Maybe. But I've seen more broken things than I can count. Some mechanical, some not. Jacob narrowed his eyes. And which one am I? Eli didn't blink. You're not broken. Just bent in places you've tried to ignore. Jacob turned away again, the words cutting too close. He rubbed his thumb against his palm, a nervous habit from childhood. The man was strange, not threatening, not invasive, just too perceptive. How long you been working on trains? He asked, trying to shift the focus. Long enough. That's not an answer. Eli smiled again. Maybe not. But it's all you need. Jacob didn't like how this guy spoke, like everything was both an answer and a riddle. It reminded him of his father's old sermons, back when he still believed. Before the fights, before the silence. You talk like a preacher, Jacob muttered. Eli chuckled. I talk like someone who listens. The two fell quiet again. A young couple walked down the aisle laughing. A conductor passed, nodding to Eli with a familiarity that suggested years of service. Outside, snow began to fall again, thicker now, blanketing the tracks and the flatlands beyond. Jacob shifted in his seat, growing restless. Why'd you sit next to me, anyway? The train's half empty. Eli shrugged. You looked like someone who needed company more than he wanted to admit. Jacob stared at him. You don't know me. No, Eli said calmly. But I've seen your kind before. Carrying weight they think no one can help them with. Jacob's jaw clenched. Well, thanks, but I didn't ask for help. Didn't say you did. More silence. The rhythm of the train rolled on beneath them, and the cabin lights flickered briefly as they entered a tunnel. In the dark, Jacob caught Eli's reflection in the window. For a moment, it seemed softer than it should be. Almost glowing. He blinked, and it was gone. When they emerged back into daylight, Eli stood. I'll be back in a bit, just checking the cars. Jacob didn't respond. He watched him go, unsure why his chest suddenly felt tighter. The seat beside him felt colder the moment Eli left. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and whispered to himself, What the hell is this guy? He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Jacob stared out the window, his breath fogging the glass. Snow danced outside in delicate spirals, wrapping the world in silence. The train kept humming forward, indifferent to the storm building not just on the plains but inside him. Eli had been gone for a while now, and Jacob was starting to feel the absence. He hated how the man's words lingered. You're not broken, just bent in places you've tried to ignore. That line kept replaying like a song stuck in his head. When Eli finally returned, he settled into the seat without a word. Jacob didn't greet him either, but the silence wasn't hostile this time. It was the stillness after a storm, not before one. Eli leaned back and rested his hands on his thighs. You ever feel like the world just moved on without you? Jacob blinked. Every day for the last year. What happened? Jacob let out a bitter laugh. Which part? The betrayal, the collapse, the isolation? Pick your poison. I'm listening. For a moment, Jacob considered brushing it off again, but something cracked open. "I co-founded a startup," he began. "Social commerce tech. We got seed money, built it up fast. I was the face of it, press, partnerships, pitches. My partner Aaron handled the back end. We were a good team." Or so I thought. Eli didn't interrupt. "One day I find out he's been siphoning money, using shell accounts, setting me up to take the fall. And when I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. Just said, 'I needed a way out. You'll land on your feet. You always do.' Like it was nothing." Jacob's voice wavered, but he didn't stop. "Investors pulled out. Lawsuits followed. I lost everything. No savings, no apartment. Nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and 1,000 voicemails I didn't return." Eli nodded once, slowly. "And no one stood by you?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "My so-called friends disappeared. My family, we've been distant for years. My dad died when I was 20. Mom and I talk twice a year, if that. No siblings, no partner. I built everything on my own. And when it all crumbled, I had no one to blame but myself for trusting people who never deserved it." Eli looked at him, not with pity but understanding. "That trust," Eli said, "wasn't a weakness. It was a strength someone misused." Jacob scoffed. "Tell that to the repo guy who took my car. You risked, you dreamed, and you gave. Those aren't crimes." "The pain doesn't make them wrong." Jacob shook his head. "It makes me a fool. No, it makes you human." There was something in Eli's voice, calm, solid, like he'd carried others through similar storms. It unnerved Jacob how deeply the words resonated. "What about you?" Jacob asked, needing to shift the focus. "Ever been stabbed in the back?" Eli looked down at his hands, dirt lining the creases of his knuckles. "Once, by someone I loved." The train shifted slightly, the tracks curving. Jacob waited, but Eli didn't elaborate. "That's vague," he muttered. "Some stories aren't about the details," Eli replied. "They're about what you choose to carry afterward." Jacob leaned back, arms crossed, teeth clenched. The urge to lash out, at Aaron, at himself, at the silence, burned in his throat. But Eli just sat there, a quiet presence that offered no judgment, only space. And in that space, Jacob's anger softened just a fraction. For the first time in months, he didn't feel entirely alone in his failure. The train rumbled over a bridge, icy water rushing beneath. A new snowfall began, thicker this time, coating the world in white again. Jacob glanced at Eli, voice low. "You ever wonder if some people just aren't meant to recover?" Eli didn't hesitate. "No. I believe some people just haven't been shown how." Jacob didn't answer, but his fingers stopped trembling. Outside, the storm gathered. Inside, something began to melt. The train jerked slightly, slowing more than it should. Jacob looked up, instinctively checking the window. The landscape had changed. Open fields now blanketed in a thickening sheet of snow, the sky above turning a muted grey that threatened worse. There was a stillness in the air, a hush that felt more like warning than peace. An announcement crackled over the speaker. "Due to deteriorating weather conditions ahead, we'll be making an unscheduled stop in Bell Hollow. We apologize for the inconvenience." Jacob frowned. "Where the hell is Bell Hollow?" Eli folded his hands calmly. "Small town, halfway point between nothing and nowhere." "Perfect," Jacob muttered, leaning his head back. This trip just keeps getting better. When the train pulled into the station, it did so reluctantly, like it too didn't want to stop here. The platform was barely lit, old wooden beams creaking under the weight of snow. A small brick building with a rusted sign marked the station's name. Wind whipped across the tracks, carrying sharp flurries that bit at exposed skin the moment passengers stepped outside. "Looks like we'll be here a while," Eli said, standing up. Jacob hesitated. "You going out there?" Eli nodded. "Storm this strong. It's safer to wait it out in shelter. Come on." Reluctantly, Jacob followed. The cold hit like a punch, raw and immediate. He buried his chin into his scarf as they stepped into the snow. Other passengers scattered, some heading into the station, others looking for help from the limited staff. There was confusion, frustration, A few raised voices. A maintenance worker shouted, "We got word the track ahead's iced over. Nothing's moving past the ridge until this clears." "Might be hours. Or days," someone muttered nearby. Eli walked with purpose, guiding Jacob toward a side street off the main platform. They passed shuttered shops and homes with lights flickering dimly behind drawn curtains. Despite the snow and wind, Eli's steps were confident. "Where are we going?" Jacob asked, teeth chattering. "There's a church a couple blocks down. Used to serve as a storm shelter for stranded travelers." "You just know that?" Eli offered a half smile. "You pick things up when you ride these tracks long enough." Jacob didn't reply. His boots crunched in the snow, fingers numb despite gloves. When they reached the church, its doors were already ajar. A handwritten sign taped to the entrance read, "Welcome travelers, warmth and coffee inside." They stepped into warmth that felt like rescue. The inside glowed with soft yellow light, folding chairs, space heaters, and the smell of something hot brewing. A few passengers had already found seats. A middle-aged woman in a thick cardigan greeted them. "Glad you made it in. There's coffee and soup near the back." Eli nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." As Jacob shed his coat, rubbing his hands together, he noticed the woman looking at Eli strangely. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes wide. "Have we met before? You look so familiar." Eli smiled gently. "I don't believe so." "I could swear," she began, but let the thought drift away, clearly unsettled. Jacob watched the exchange, something prickling at the back of his mind. They found 2 seats near the back. Jacob took a paper cup of steaming coffee, grateful for the burn on his tongue. He glanced around the room, families huddled together, older folks napping, a teenager tapping nervously at a cracked phone. "This place feels out of time," Jacob said softly. Eli nodded. "Sometimes the quiet places hold louder truths." Jacob took a sip. "You talk like that on purpose?" Eli just smiled again. Lightning cracked outside, followed by a deep roll of thunder. The storm was getting worse. Jacob looked at Eli and said, not quite joking, "You sure you're not a priest?" "No," Eli said, "but I know what it's like to walk through storms with no shelter." Something in that answer pierced deeper than expected. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, Jacob was finally beginning to listen. The church smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax, the kind of place where the silence had weight, as if it had listened to too many prayers to ever be light again. Jacob walked further inside, his steps hesitant. The storm raged outside, hammering the stained glass with snow and sleet, but in here, the world felt still. Rows of folding chairs had been arranged across the worn carpet. A few locals moved around quietly, offering blankets and soup. The heater near the pulpit hummed like a heartbeat. Jacob settled into a chair at the edge of the room. He could feel the warmth slowly seeping through his layers, unthawing his hands but not his thoughts. Eli sat beside him again, calm, as if this was the most natural place on earth for him to be. Across the room, a small group had formed near the front. They were singing, not a performance, just soft harmonies, an old hymn, familiar, painfully so. "Come thou fount of every blessing." Jacob stiffened. He knew that song. His mother used to hum it while folding laundry, humming louder whenever his father stormed through the house. It was her armor, her prayer. He hadn't heard it in decades. Eli glanced sideways. "You recognize it?" Jacob looked away. "Yeah. My mom used to sing that when I was a kid, before things got hard." "Before what?" Eli's voice was gentle, but it didn't let him off the hook. Jacob inhaled through his nose. "Before my dad changed. He wasn't always cruel, but something shifted when the factory laid him off. Bitterness settled in. The silence turned violent." Eli didn't respond. He didn't have to. "I stopped going to church when I was 12, Jacob continued. Told my mum I didn't believe anymore. Truth was, I just couldn't stand hearing about love and grace from a pulpit while watching my mother cry herself to sleep. The melody rose again, haunting and low. The lyrics curled through the rafters like smoke. Jacob's voice broke. She kept singing, though. Always. No matter what he said or did, she just kept singing. She was stronger than she looked, Eli said. Jacob nodded slowly. Yeah, she was. They sat in silence for a while. The heater clicked softly. Somewhere a kettle whistled. The hymn faded, replaced by murmurs and the shuffle of blankets. A woman passed by with a tray of paper bowls. "Would you like some soup?" she asked kindly. Jacob hesitated. "Sure." As she handed it to him, her eyes flicked to Eli. She paused, her brows knitting. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" she asked. Eli offered a polite smile. "I don't believe so. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Sorry, must be the storm messing with my head." Jacob watched her walk off. "That's the second person today who thinks they know you." Eli shrugged. "Some faces are just familiar." Jacob narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe you've been places you don't talk about." Eli didn't deny it. Jacob sipped the soup. It was simple. Broth, potato, something that might have been chicken. But it was hot, and it filled a space inside he hadn't realized was so hollow. He leaned back in the chair, letting the heat, the memory of the hymn and the presence of a man who never seemed to flinch wash over him. "I used to think faith was a crutch," he said quietly. Eli turned to him. "And now?" "I think maybe I just didn't want to admit how tired I was of walking without it." Eli's eyes softened. "You're not as far gone as you think." Jacob didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. Thunder boomed again, closer this time. The lights flickered once. Outside, the storm pressed harder. But inside the church, Jacob felt something he hadn't in years, stillness that didn't feel empty. The church had quieted. Most of the stranded passengers were either asleep or lost in their phones, trying to find updates on the storm. The glow from a few battery-powered lanterns gave the room a warm haze. Jacob sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the cracks in the floorboards. The voices from the hymn still echoed in his mind. Each note had stirred something he thought was long buried. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was grief. Raw, unfinished grief. Eli sat nearby, sipping coffee slowly, as if waiting without pressuring. Jacob finally spoke. "My mom used to sing to drown out the shouting." Eli looked at him, patient. "I'd hide in my room, bury my head in a pillow, and she'd be in the kitchen, singing that same hymn every time, even when he broke the plates, even when he pushed her." Jacob rubbed the back of his neck, eyes burning. "I asked her once why she kept doing it, why she didn't scream back or leave." Eli tilted his head. "What did she say?" Jacob gave a dry laugh. "She said, 'Because I believe in a love louder than his anger.'" Eli didn't speak. The silence gave Jacob room. "I didn't believe her. I thought she was weak, that she just didn't know how to stand up for herself. But looking back, I think she was the only one who knew how to stand at all." "You were just a boy," Eli said softly. "You saw what a child sees. It's only now you're learning to see through her eyes." Jacob stared down at the coffee in his hands, as if it held answers. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer. I didn't go back for the funeral." Eli didn't flinch. "She called me 2 weeks before," Jacob continued. "Said she wanted to talk. I told her I was too busy. She said she understood, that she loved me." His voice broke. That was the last time I heard her voice. The weight of those words settled heavily in the space between them. I told myself I'd make it up to her when I was successful, that I'd finally be the son she deserved once I had something to show for myself. He looked up, eyes wet. "And now I've got nothing." "You think love waits for success?" Eli asked. Jacob opened his mouth, then closed it. "She wasn't waiting for a product launch or an IPO. She was waiting for her son." Jacob swallowed hard. His throat ached like he'd swallowed glass. "I didn't deserve her forgiveness." Eli leaned forward slightly. "She gave it anyway." The truth of it hit Jacob like a wave. His chest tightened. He pressed his fingers into his eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, quiet and relentless. "I've spent so long running from that house," he whispered. "I forgot what I was running toward." Eli nodded. Maybe this stop wasn't about the storm outside. Jacob wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to steady his breathing. A few feet away, the small group started humming again. Another song, this one even older. No words, just melody. A sound that filled the church like warm light. Jacob closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't fight the memory. He let it rise. His mother in the kitchen, steam rising from a pot of soup. Her voice strong and gentle, cutting through the tension in the air, her hand reaching for his as he cried behind the table. Her saying, "God's not done with you yet, Jacob." He opened his eyes slowly. The ache was still there, but it was different now. Not the weight of guilt. Something else. Something like hope. He looked at Eli. "She forgave me before I even knew I needed it." Eli nodded. That's what love does. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, something long frozen had begun to break. Morning came grey and heavy, with clouds still dragging across the sky, but the wind had quieted. The worst of the storm had passed. Volunteers moved through the church handing out updated schedules. The train was set to depart within the hour. Passengers began collecting blankets, folding chairs, gathering bags they'd spread across the floor during the night. Jacob stood near a narrow window, watching frost melt down the glass. His mind was a tangle of memories and silence. The church had become more than just shelter. It had become a mirror. Behind him, Eli approached quietly. "We should get moving." Jacob nodded, grabbing his coat. As they stepped back into the cold, it felt different now. Not as biting, not as harsh. The snow had slowed to a soft drift, and the path to the station was slushy but manageable. Around them, others walked slowly, still waking from the long night. Back on the train, the atmosphere had shifted. People smiled more, spoke more. A sense of shared survival hung in the air. The conductor made a dry joke over the intercom about coffee being double strength today, and a soft chuckle ran through the car. Jacob returned to his seat. Eli followed, settling beside him as if he'd never left. They sat in companionable quiet for a while, as the train creaked to life and rolled forward again, heading west. The windows showed a world still dusted in white, but waking slowly beneath it. Jacob broke the silence. "You ever notice how people change after going through something together?" Eli nodded. "Hardship reveals things comfort hides." Jacob looked around. "I see it in their eyes. Yesterday everyone was distant, closed off. Now they're helping each other with bags, asking names. Pain has a way of opening people." Jacob leaned back. "What's it done to me then?" Eli glanced at him. "It's made you look inward. That's the beginning of any real journey." Jacob smiled faintly. "You and your riddles." Eli didn't reply. Jacob's eyes wandered down the aisle. He noticed a young woman helping an elderly man with his coat. A kid offering half a sandwich to another. And Eli, he wasn't just watching, he was part of it. Every so often, someone would nod to him, thank him, even when Jacob hadn't seen Eli do anything. He watched Eli speak briefly with a couple across the aisle, just a few words, but their faces lit up afterward like someone had handed them sunlight. "You've got some kind of magic," Jacob muttered. Eli turned to him. "Kindness isn't magic. It's memory of what it feels like to need and receive." Jacob shook his head. "No. It's more than that. These people barely saw you, and somehow you made them feel seen." Eli's gaze was steady. "That's what I was sent to do." Jacob blinked. "Sent? By who?" Eli simply smiled. Jacob leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I mattered. To strangers, investors, even ghosts. And what did you find?" Jacob paused. "That none of them cared when everything fell apart. But for some reason, you sit down next to me on a train and talk like you've known me since birth. Maybe I just see the part of you that's always been waiting to be heard." Jacob turned toward the window. Outside, the horizon stretched wide and endless, the snow beginning to fade as they descended from the ridge. "What if I don't know what to do next?" he asked quietly. "You don't have to," Eli said. You just have to keep going. Jacob nodded slowly. The ache in his chest hadn't left, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. The train rumbled beneath them, steady as breath. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt like he wasn't running from something. He was heading toward it. The train pushed westward through Nebraska, the snow now patchy across golden fields. Morning light spilled through the windows, softening the fatigue in people's faces. Jacob sat with his arms crossed, half dozing, half thinking. His body was sore, but his mind was alert in a way it hadn't been in months. He wasn't numb anymore. He felt deeply, painfully, fully. Across the aisle, a sudden sound cut through the quiet. A gasp, a thud, and then a low moan. Jacob looked over and saw a young man, barely older than 20, slumped forward in his seat, clutching his head with trembling hands. His breathing was ragged, shoulders shaking. A few passengers turned, unsure what was happening. Then Eli stood. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He crossed the aisle and crouched beside the young man. "Hey," Eli said gently. "You're safe. You're here, on a train. Breathe with me." The man didn't respond, eyes wide, locked somewhere far away. His fingers gripped the armrest until his knuckles went white. Eli's voice dropped lower, calmer. "You're not there anymore. Listen to my voice. You're not alone." Jacob watched, transfixed. Eli placed a steady hand on the young man's arm, not restraining, just anchoring. Slowly, the man's breaths began to sync with Eli's. "What's your name?" Eli asked softly. "Tyler," the man whispered. "Okay, Tyler, I'm Eli. You're safe now. Do you know where you are?" Tyler blinked hard. "On a train." "That's right, and you're doing great. Just keep breathing." Jacob looked around. Some passengers had turned back to their conversations, assuming the moment had passed. But Jacob couldn't look away. He recognized that kind of collapse. It wasn't physical. It was emotional, the body trying to carry what the mind could no longer hold. After a minute, Tyler sat back slowly, wiping his face. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "You don't need to apologize," Eli said. "You've carried more than most people ever will. I thought I was past this. It's been a year since I got back." Eli nodded. "Time doesn't heal what's buried. It only hardens it." Tyler gave a bitter laugh. "I don't even know why I got on this train. I just needed to move anywhere." "You did the right thing," Eli said. "You followed the pull instead of the pain." Tyler looked at him, tired and raw. "Do you know what it's like to watch your friend die right next to you and not be able to do anything?" Eli's eyes darkened with quiet understanding. "Yes." Something in that answer made Tyler nod slowly, like he finally believed someone wasn't lying to him. "You're not alone anymore," Eli said. "You don't have to carry this in silence." Tyler exhaled hard, then nodded again. "Thanks." Eli stood and gently squeezed his shoulder before returning to his seat beside Jacob. Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then, that was something. He didn't need someone to fix him, Eli said. He just needed someone to be there. Jacob looked out the window. "My cousin came back from Afghanistan 6 years ago. Different man. Smiled less, slept less. One day he just didn't wake up." Eli said nothing, letting the grief speak for itself. "I never asked him what he saw. I thought I'd be intruding." "You were afraid of the pain," Eli said. Jacob nodded. "And now it's mine too." Eli turned to him. "Pain shared becomes lighter." Jacob pressed his lips together. Something tight tugged at his chest. "You think Tyler's gonna be okay?" "He took a step forward today. That's more than most." Jacob looked over at Tyler, who now sat upright, breathing slowly, eyes clearer. And for the first time, Jacob wondered how many other people on this train were just barely holding it together. He looked at Eli. "You really have done this before, haven't you?" Eli didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The train rocked gently through the plains, slicing across frozen rivers and clusters of bare trees. Inside, the mood had shifted, calmer, lighter. Jacob noticed it in the way people moved, in the hum of low conversations, in the way strangers now nodded at each other without hesitation. Something had thawed. He stood to stretch his legs, walking slowly down the aisle. Eli remained in their seat, his eyes closed, as if listening to something beyond the train's walls. Jacob didn't disturb him. Further down, Jacob passed families huddled together, reading, playing cards, quietly laughing. The smell of coffee and something sweet from the dining car drifted in faintly. Then a sudden voice cut through the hum. "Lily? Lily!" It was sharp, a mother's voice, urgent. Jacob turned. A woman, maybe 30, was standing now, eyes wide with panic, turning circles. "Lily!" "Where are you?" Passengers turned. Her husband rose quickly, looking under seats, peering around corners. Jacob stepped closer. "What's going on?" "Our daughter," the woman said, breathless. "She was just coloring right here. She's 5. She wouldn't just wander off." Her hands trembled. Jacob nodded, trying to stay calm. "We'll find her." Voices rose as others stood to help. A small search began, aisle by aisle, car by car. People opened restroom doors, checked between rows, asked questions. The mood turned anxious. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Panic spread. "Where could she go?" someone muttered. "There's nowhere to go." And then, "I found her," a voice called from the far end. Everyone turned. A man emerged from the last car, cradling a small girl in his arms. Her cheeks were tear-streaked, a crumpled drawing clutched in one hand. But she wasn't scared. She was calm. It was Eli. He carried her gently, murmuring something only she could hear. The mother rushed forward, grabbing her daughter and holding her tight, sobbing. "I just wanted to find my crayons," Lily mumbled. "You scared us, baby," the mother said through tears. Eli offered a small smile. She found a quiet corner and got turned around. I was in the back when I heard her crying. The parents thanked him profusely. Jacob stood nearby watching. When the chaos settled and Lily was safe in her seat again, Jacob pulled Eli aside. "You just happened to be there?" "I was checking on the coupling between cars. Felt like I should." Jacob crossed his arms. "Or you knew?" Eli didn't answer directly. Children wander, it's in their nature, but they also listen better than adults. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "She told me she wasn't scared. Said she felt like someone was with her the whole time." Jacob stared at him. "You think that was you?" Eli tilted his head. "Not always." There it was again, that half answer, the glimpse of something deeper. Jacob felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. He looked back at Lily, now asleep against her mother's side. "I lost someone like that once," Jacob said, voice quieter. "My little brother. We were supposed to walk home from school together. He wanted to race. I let him run ahead." He paused, the memory thick in his throat. "Next time I saw him was in a hospital bed, hit by a car." Eli's voice was soft. "You blamed yourself." "For years. Still do. You were just a boy. I should have stopped him." "You were a boy," Eli repeated, "carrying a man's guilt. It was never yours to carry." Jacob stared at the floor. "Tell that to the part of me that still sees his face every time I close my eyes." "I think you just did." Jacob looked at him, and Eli said, "Maybe now it's time to stop running from the child inside you too." Outside, the sun dipped lower behind hills, casting golden light over snow-covered fields. Inside, Jacob felt the weight of another memory lift, just enough. The sun had faded, leaving a pale twilight stretching over the landscape. The train was a glowing ribbon moving through the quiet wilderness. Inside, lights flickered softly above, and most passengers had settled into their rhythms, some reading, others napping, a few whispering in low voices. Jacob sat in his seat, arms folded, eyes fixed ahead, but not really seeing. Eli was next to him, quiet as ever, hands resting calmly on his lap. The silence between them had grown thick, not uncomfortable, but charged. Jacob exhaled slowly. "I've been watching you." Eli turned his head. "I know. You show up out of nowhere, sit beside me, say things that feel like they were meant for someone who knows my whole life." Then you calm down a panicking vet, find a lost child, say exactly what people need to hear at the exact moment they need to hear it. Eli's gaze held his, unwavering. You're not just some maintenance guy, Jacob said. I never claimed to be. Jacob's voice hardened. Then who are you? Eli didn't blink. Someone walking beside you. Jacob leaned in. Cut the riddles. Just tell me. About your angle. You're too calm, too tuned in, like you've been planning this. I haven't planned anything, Eli said evenly. I just show up where I'm needed. Jacob let out a bitter laugh. That's not an answer. Eli didn't move. You want an answer you can measure, something logical, but what if it's bigger than that? Jacob clenched his fists. I've spent my whole life being rational. Being in control, that's how I built everything. And now it's all gone, every piece. You show up in the middle of that wreckage and you expect me to just accept that you're some... What? Wandering wisdom dispenser? I expect nothing, Eli said gently. I just came to walk this part of the road with you. Jacob's voice dropped tighter. Then why me? Why now? Because you cried out, Eli said simply. Jacob blinked. What? Eli's voice was quiet but firm. Not with words, but in your pain, in your silence. In that night, you sat in your apartment holding a bottle in one hand and a photograph in the other, wondering if there was any reason left to keep breathing. Jacob felt a chill climb his spine. I was there, Eli said. Not as a man on a train, but in the stillness, in the thought that told you maybe just one more day. Jacob looked away, heart pounding. No one was there. You were wrong. Jacob stood abruptly, stepping into the aisle. This is insane. Eli didn't follow. He just said calmly, You've been asking for answers. I'm here because you're ready to hear them. Jacob turned back. What are you then, an angel, a ghost, God? Eli rose slowly. Would it matter if the words help, if the wounds start to close? Jacob stared at him, breathing hard. You want the truth? Eli asked. Jacob nodded once sharply. I'm just a worker, Eli said, stepping closer. But I don't just work on trains. Jacob's throat dried. The air around them felt different, like something ancient had entered the space between words. Before he could speak again, a voice from the intercom interrupted. Next stop, Denver Union Station. Arrival in 20 minutes. The moment broke. Jacob stood frozen. Eli walked past him, gently touching his shoulder. I'll be waiting by the doors, he said. And just like that, he was gone. Jacob sat down slowly, his pulse racing. Everything inside him spun. He didn't know what to believe, but something deeper than logic told him this was no ordinary man. And when they reached Denver, he needed to know the truth. The lights of Denver twinkled in the distance, scattered like fireflies beneath the darkening sky. The train began to slow, the wheels screeching lightly as it approached the final station. Jacob sat motionless, elbows on his knees, hands clenched. He stared at the floor, trying to make sense of the conversation, of everything Eli had said. He didn't know what he believed anymore. He glanced toward the exit doors where Eli had said he'd wait, but Eli wasn't there, not yet. Jacob felt an urge to go after him, to demand more, to press further, but his body refused to move. It was like his thoughts had turned into weights. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, without warning, sleep pulled him under. But it wasn't peaceful. In his dream, he was walking down an empty street. The buildings were familiar, his childhood neighborhood, but the windows were broken, the sidewalks cracked. A fog rolled in, thick and cold. He walked alone, calling names that echoed back at him. His father, his mother, his brother. No one answered. Then he saw himself, sitting on a bench, head in hands, face hollow, alone. He wanted to run, to reach out, but his legs froze. Suddenly a hand touched his shoulder. He turned and there stood Eli, but not dressed as a rail worker. He wore white, not glowing, not blinding, just pure. His eyes, deeper than anything Jacob had ever seen, held both sorrow and strength. You've run long enough, Eli said softly. Jacob tried to speak, but no words came. You've punished yourself for pain you didn't cause. For love you thought you lost. For faith you never stopped needing. Tears streamed down Jacob's face. I'm tired, he whispered. Eli knelt beside him. Then let me carry the weight. Jacob collapsed into his arms. I don't deserve grace, he sobbed. No one does, Eli said. That's why it's grace. The fog lifted, light poured through the clouds, the broken windows mended. The silence turned into song, and Jacob woke up, gasping. He sat bolt upright in his seat, sweat on his brow, breath ragged. The train was stopped. The lights inside were dimmed for arrival. People were collecting bags, stretching, talking softly. He looked around. Eli was gone. Jacob stood and walked to the front car. No sign of him. He moved to the next car. Nothing. He pushed open the connecting doors, searching. Have you seen the guy I was sitting with? He asked a passing passenger. She looked at him blankly. You were alone. No. The guy in the blue work jacket. Eli. She shook her head. I never saw anyone else with you. Jacob turned to another man, the worker that helped the girl and the soldier, Eli. Where is he? The man looked confused. I thought the girl's parents found her, and that young guy, he just said he needed a break and went back to sleep. Jacob backed away, heart pounding. He hurried toward the back of the train, toward the crew compartments. An older man in coveralls swept the floor near the last car. Excuse me, Jacob said. Do you know where the guy named Eli went? The one who works maintenance? The man stopped sweeping and gave him a puzzled look. There's no Eli working this train. Jacob stared at him. I've worked this line 15 years, the man added. Know every name on the manifest. No Eli. Jacob's mouth went dry. But he stopped. There was no point. He turned slowly, looking out the window toward the platform. Snow was falling again, soft and slow. He stepped off the train into the cold, his thoughts spinning. Eli was gone, but he'd never felt more present, and in his chest, where despair had lived for so long, there was something else now, a warmth, a question, and the beginning of belief. The cold in Denver cut sharper than Chicago's. It wasn't wind, it was altitude and silence. Jacob stepped off the platform slowly, scanning every face in the crowd. No sign of Eli, no work jacket, no calm smile. Just travelers hustling to cabs, hugging loved ones, dragging bags toward the station lobby. He stood still, heart thudding. It couldn't have been a dream. He remembered the touch of Eli's hand on his shoulder, the cadence of his voice, the way he looked at people like he already knew what they carried. Jacob closed his eyes, trying to summon it again, anything that could anchor him to what just happened. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing the next departure. He turned back toward the train. Maybe he'd just missed him. He jogged the length of the platform, ignoring the people brushing past. He checked each car's door, glanced through windows, peeked inside before a conductor gently stopped him. Sir, can I help you? I'm looking for someone, Jacob said quickly. Eli. He was a worker on this train, maintenance, blue jacket, dark hair, quiet. The conductor raised a brow. We don't have a worker by that name. No, I know that's what everyone says, Jacob insisted. But he was here. He sat next to me. He found the lost girl, helped the young vet who had a panic attack. The conductor frowned slightly. The girl was reunited with her mom by another passenger. As for the soldier, I don't remember any incidents like that. Jacob's voice dropped. He was real. So I talked to him. He trailed off. Even to his own ears, it sounded unhinged. The conductor nodded politely. Maybe check inside. Someone in customer service might be able to help. Jacob walked away slowly, chest tight. He didn't go to customer service. He didn't want polite smiles or blank stares. He wanted answers. Inside the station, he moved aimlessly for a few minutes, unsure what to do. He sat on a bench near the west exit, watching the snowfall grow heavier. The glow from street lamps painted the world in soft orange hues. And then an elderly janitor pushing a mop bucket passed nearby. Hey, Jacob said, standing abruptly. The man looked up, eyes kind beneath a worn baseball cap. "Have you worked here long?" 32 years, the man said proudly. "Have you ever seen a guy named Eli working the rails? Wears a blue jacket, maybe helps out in times of bad weather." The janitor paused. "Eli?" "Yeah, kinda quiet, calming, knows things about people he shouldn't." The old man chuckled faintly. "You're not the first one to ask that." Jacob blinked. "I'm not?" "Nope. Every few years, someone steps off a train, asking about a guy named Eli. Same description, same story. One time it was a woman from Texas, another time a guy from Idaho, always a blue jacket, always quiet." Jacob stared. "And no one knows who he is?" "Not officially," the janitor said, starting to mop again. "But some of us have theories." "Like what?" The man smiled without looking up. "Some folks say he's just a helper. A traveler who only shows up when someone's close to giving up." Jacob didn't respond. "You see him?" the janitor asked gently. Jacob nodded. The janitor gave a small grin. "Then you were lucky." Jacob walked outside, snow clinging to his coat, breath puffing in the cold. He stood at the curb, cars sliding past on wet streets, people shouting, laughing, living. He whispered to himself, he was real. He didn't need confirmation anymore. The ache in his chest had shifted, not gone, but different, like something had been placed inside it to grow. He didn't know where to go next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the road ahead. Snow sifted across Wynkoop Street as Jacob left the station, the air thin and bright with alpine cold. He walked without aim, past brick warehouses turned lofts and bars, past murals splashed against alley walls, until the ache in his legs matched the worry in his chest. He had come to Denver to disappear. Now he was here, and the thought felt like an old lie breaking in his hands. He stopped outside a corner coffee shop near Union Station, drawn by the glow and the promise of heat. Inside, a chalkboard listed roasts from Ethiopia and Peru. A barista with a nose ring moved with quick, practiced motions. Jacob ordered a black coffee and chose a seat by the window, where the glass trembled slightly each time the light rail slid past. His hands shook when he reached for the cup. He set them in his lap and pressed his palms together until the tremor eased. "You okay, man?" a nearby voice asked. Jacob looked up. Across from him sat a grad student by the look of the backpack and the stack of marked-up articles, eyes rimmed red but curious. "Long night," the kid said. "Yeah," Jacob said. "You look like someone waiting on a verdict." "Maybe I am." The kid hesitated, then offered a crooked smile. "I'm Theo," he said. They shook hands. The barista set Jacob's coffee down and slid a receipt toward him. On the back, in blue pen, someone had written, "You're not alone." Jacob swallowed. He didn't know if it was standard kindness or something else reaching him through the noise. "I'm defending my thesis in 2 hours," Theo said, tapping the papers, "and I'm 90% sure I'm a fraud." "Congratulations," Jacob said dryly. "Thanks," he laughed nervously. "Any advice from the trenches?" "Don't build your life on applause," Jacob said before he could stop himself. Theo blinked. "That's specific," Theo said. "Learn the work, love the people, and let the approval land where it wants." He heard Eli in his own voice and bit his lip. "Seriously, man, that helps," Theo said. "Are you a professor?" "I used to run a company," Jacob said. "It ran me instead." Theo looked at him like a puzzle piece had just clicked. Outside, a gust pushed snow into swirls. Inside, the cafe's playlist drifted into an old gospel tune Jacob recognized without wanting to. His plan, quiet, final, arranged like a closed envelope, shook in his pocket. He pressed a hand to it and felt the same question that had followed him since the train. What if this isn't the end? "You look far away," Theo said. "I'm deciding whether to live today," Jacob answered, before fear could edit the truth. Theo didn't recoil. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay for coffee. Stay for the next breath." Jacob nodded, a small, almost private motion. He reached into his bag and pulled out a spiral notebook he used for invoices back when that word mattered. On the first blank page he wrote, slowly, This is the story of when I traveled with Jesus. His hand steadied. He kept writing, notes, fragments, the shape of a new map. When he paused, Theo was watching him with a gentleness that reminded Jacob of the church the night before, refuge without demand. I should go, Theo said, gathering his papers. Thanks for not lying to me. Jacob almost smiled. Knock them dead, he said, then corrected himself. No, shine. Theo laughed, saluted with the folder, and left. Jacob stayed. He drank his coffee, bought a second, and watched the snow keep falling like a curtain being gently closed and opened, closed and opened. He waited for despair to return, and when it didn't, he let the quiet settle. The page waited too. He turned to it again and chose life with the next sentence. Outside, a horn echoed off the brickwork, low and steady, like a promise keeping time. Jacob breathed in, and the world answered by not leaving. The return to Chicago felt like a different journey entirely. The city skyline no longer loomed as a sentence, but as a question waiting for his answer. Jacob carried only his suitcase, the same one that had felt like an anchor weeks ago. Now it felt lighter, though nothing inside had changed. What had changed was him. The first door he knocked on was his mother's. The walk up to the small familiar porch nearly broke him, the chipped paint on the railing, the potted plants she had always tended, the curtain she used to peek through when he came home late as a teenager. His hand hovered over the door for a full minute before he finally knocked. When she opened it, her grey hair framed a face both shocked and trembling. "Jacob?" "Hi, Mom," he said, voice breaking. She didn't answer. She pulled him into her arms with surprising strength. He buried his face in her shoulder, and for the first time in years let himself be held like a son instead of a failure. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her coat, "for the silence. For missing everything." Her tears wet his cheek. "You're here now. That's all I ever wanted." The hours that followed were slow, filled with stories, apologies, and the quiet understanding of two people who had lost years, but hadn't lost love. When Jacob left her house that evening, the air outside felt warmer, even in January. His next step was harder. He found Aaron, his former business partner, in a downtown cafe. Seeing him again was like reopening a scar. Aaron looked surprised but wary. "Jacob," he said, setting down his cup. "I didn't expect—" "I'm not here to fight," Jacob interrupted. His throat tightened. "I'm here to forgive." Aaron blinked. "After everything?" "I carried it like it would keep me alive, but it only killed me slower. You betrayed me. You left me ruined, but I don't want that weight anymore." Aaron stared at him, stunned. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Jacob said, standing. "Just don't do it to anyone else." When he stepped back into the street, his legs felt weak, but his chest felt clear. Forgiveness hadn't erased the damage, but it had unlocked the cage he'd been building inside himself. In the weeks that followed, Jacob began something new. Not a company, not a gamble, but a project born from the ruins of his old life. He called it Second Chance, a space for young entrepreneurs who had failed, who thought the collapse of their dream was the collapse of themselves. He rented a small office above a bookstore, painted the walls himself, and filled it with second-hand furniture. Flyers went up in coffee shops and community centers. "Failed? You're not finished. Join us." At first only 3 people came, then 5, then 15. They sat in a circle, some trembling, some cynical, all exhausted from carrying silent shame. Jacob listened. He told his story, not as a pitch, but as a confession. "I thought failure meant I had no reason to live," he told them. "Then I met someone on a train who reminded me I was never really alone. You don't have to believe me, but I believe in you." Eyes lifted, shoulders straightened. Something grew in that small room that wasn't profit or recognition, but purpose. And Jacob found himself becoming a bridge, not a man proving his worth, but a man sharing his scars so others might heal their own. Late one night, after the last person had gone, Jacob sat alone in the quiet office. He opened his notebook and wrote one sentence underlined in ink. Grace is not the absence of failure, it is the presence of love after it. And for the first time he didn't doubt a word of it. Spring came late to Chicago that year, but when it did, Jacob noticed it. The air smelled different, softer. Streets that once felt like reminders of failure now looked like corridors of possibility. He had stopped moving like a man waiting for punishment. He was moving like someone being sent. On a quiet Friday, Jacob boarded a train again. Same station, same metallic hum of wheels. But this time he wasn't running. He wore no disguise of success, carried no illusion of control. He was traveling west, not to escape, but to offer what he had found. He had joined a volunteer program that paired travelers with passengers in crisis. Strangers who needed a listening ear, someone who wouldn't look away. Jacob didn't tell anyone the real reason he signed up. He didn't need to. He knew why. He sat midway through the car, notebook in his bag, eyes scanning the rows. For a while he just listened. The shuffle of cards being dealt, a child humming against her mother's shoulder, the rattle of cans from the dining car. Every sound was alive. Then he noticed him. A man about his own age, though worn down, slouched against the window. His face was drawn, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes restless as though sleep had become a stranger. Jacob recognized the look instantly, the look of someone who had given up but hadn't yet admitted it. He slid across the aisle. "This seat taken?" The man shook his head. Jacob sat. "Name's Jacob." The man hesitated, then said, "Chris." Jacob nodded. Silence stretched for a moment. Then Jacob said lightly, "You look like someone carrying a heavier bag than the one by your feet." Chris gave a humorless laugh. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's carried one too." Chris turned his face toward the window. "I don't think I can do this anymore. Lost my job, lost my wife. My kids, they don't answer when I call. I thought maybe if I just left, things would be easier for everyone." Jacob felt his throat tighten. He could hear echoes of his own words from months before. But now he had an answer. "Easier for them?" Jacob asked gently. "Or easier for you?" Chris didn't respond. His shoulders shook just slightly. "I know what that place feels like," Jacob continued. "I thought my life was over too, but someone once told me I wasn't as alone as I thought, that there was still more road ahead." Chris scoffed. "Sounds like fortune cookie wisdom." Jacob smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it kept me alive, long enough to see I wasn't finished." Chris turned to look at him, eyes wet. "And you believe that? About me?" Jacob didn't hesitate. "I do, because you're still here." "Which means the story isn't over." The train swayed, carrying them westward. Chris leaned back, exhaling like he had been holding his breath for years. "No one's ever said that to me." "Well," Jacob said, resting his hand on the seat between them, "let this be the first time and not the last." Chris nodded slowly, his gaze softening. Outside, the plains stretched endless, kissed by a sky the color of hope. Inside, Jacob felt the echo of a voice he hadn't heard since Denver. "You're never alone." He smiled, almost imperceptibly, looking at the reflection in the glass. He whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, Eli." The train rolled on, and Jacob was no longer just a man searching for purpose. He had become the very thing he once needed most, a reminder that grace travels with us, even when unseen. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more journeys that remind you that hope is never far away. And before you go, click on the video suggested on your screen right now, another story that might change the way you see the world.